Welcome. If everyone can take a seat and we'll start. Before I start, the usual, just a reminder to turn your cell phones off. A reminder to complete your surveys, hopefully by now. I'm thinking everyone in this room has downloaded the app. If they haven't, they need to do that so they can fill out the survey. In this session, it's going to be an interesting session. I'm looking forward to it. Northern Trust is going to talk about their MarkLogic adoption. So I think it'll be really interesting. I'm sure you'll have questions, but save those till the end because we will have enough time for Q&A. So I'm going to turn it over now to our senior sales engineer, Puneet Rual.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Hi, my name is Puneet Rual, and I'm really happy we are not the first session after lunch. Yeah, that is always the toughest one. Not disrespect to our previous presenter, but I'm glad we got the good spot. All right, so my name is Puneet Rual. I've been with MarkLogic for about 8 years now, and for the last 2 years, I've been working with Northern Trust with their journey towards adoption of MarkLogic. I'm joined here with Maureen Penzenik. She's a solution architect at Northern Trust. Maureen, you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Puneet. My name is Maureen Penzenik, and I have been with Northern Trust for about 18 years, and I've been in the technology field for over 30, and I've lost count because after so many years, so many technologies, you lose count. Anyway, we'll leave it at that. And my expertise has developed over those years in data architecture, enterprise data architecture, data modeling, data warehousing, business intelligence, and this has led me to the path of MarkLogic now. Another new technology. And with learning new technologies, I have had the opportunity to, more recently at Northern Trust, my role has evolved into introducing innovative data platform technologies, either as part of enterprise architecture, our group was architecture and innovation, or within specific program initiatives. So I have really enjoyed that role. And with learning new technologies comes educating yourself. And I have taken an active initiative to take those MarkLogic University courses. I started with, of course, the fundamentals. I've taken building applications with xQuery, and then also the data integration course as well. And I think it's an important part of adopting new innovative technologies is learning them. And of course, MarkLogic World, right here. This is my second MarkLogic World, and this is a great way to continue your learning journey as well. So let's get started. As Puneet mentioned, we've been on a journey at Northern Trust, and Puneet and I have worked together for about 2 years now, I think. And so we'll start out talking a little bit about, first of all, who is Northern Trust, who we are, what are our technology principles, and then Puneet and I will talk about what that journey has looked like in bringing in MarkLogic. And one of the things we've developed is a data management platform guidance framework. It's like a mouthful, right? And then we'll also talk about how we've been applying MarkLogic to various business use cases across Northern Trust. And then the mind shift that I have really noticed, and I believe very strongly about, there is a mind shift. And I think actually Gary Bloom talked about it the other day, right? It is very real, and it is a good thing, right? Because we have got innovation. We've got to think innovatively. We've got to embrace those, that shift going from relational to NoSQL and what that allows us to do. And then we're going to look ahead, moving forward. And we have found by talking with various teams at Northern Trust as they've started their MarkLogic journey, what are the things that they've learned? And we want to share with you today those 10, just 10 today, but 10 key takeaways, there are probably more, but 10 key takeaways that we think are important and we have found useful and we want to provide to you as in your MarkLogic journey as well. And then finally, I'll wrap up with what's next on our journey and our horizon at Northern Trust as we continue to leverage MarkLogic as a strategic technology platform. So who we are, Northern Trust. We are a leading financial services company. We provide asset servicing, fund administration, asset management, and banking and fiduciary solutions to corporations, institutions, families, and individuals worldwide. And we have 2 client-focused segments where we service those assets for our clients. There's wealth management and corporate and institutional services. And this chart here shows you the volume of assets that we service which is as it's under custody, administration, and under management. And we do this on our global integrated operating platform. And we deliver these services. We have some key technology principles that we are looking to deliver our client benefits. And those are timeliness, speed and agility, services on demand, data quality, data accessibility, data insight. A lot of data, right? And I love that because data has been my life. And we're looking to, at Northern Trust, leverage innovative technologies such as MarkLogic. We believe that they can help us deliver on these principles. For example, speed and agility, to ingest data more rapidly than we could have before, make it more available to our business. Data quality, we are looking to integrate MarkLogic with our data governance platform. It's something that's underway currently. And embrace the MarkLogic platform along with the rest of our data governance practice. Data accessibility, we are looking to leverage MarkLogic in the form of delivering information to our clients in new ways that we haven't been able to do before easily. And then finally, data insight as well, because we are looking to use MarkLogic's search engine eventually, we're still getting there, as we grow our analytics capabilities in the organization. So how do we deliver these benefits on our technology platform? Well, we have been starting to adopt some new methods for our success, and they revolve around adopting agile development practices and cloud-based platform, in a microservices architecture, using open source technologies, and on modern big data platforms. So yes, we have a range of data platforms now to choose from. Of course, the traditional relational SQL-based platforms to the non-relational NoSQL platforms of Hadoop and MarkLogic now. So of course, the question becomes which data platform to use. And some other questions, of course, follow on to that as well. I'm an agile project, so should I be using MarkLogic? Because I hear that you can develop and deliver solutions, way faster. Or how about this one? Oh, I don't have resources or time to do a data model. So I hear you don't need to model data to get it into MarkLogic, so should I be using MarkLogic? Well, those are valid questions. However, it's not always about the shiny new toy. Because yes, MarkLogic can help you with those areas of delivering solutions faster or not having to model your data to get the data in, but it's not the only reason. And you have to think about the fact that relational databases aren't going away, and they do serve a purpose if your data is well structured and will fit into rows and columns. There is no reason why you can't use a relational database. So you want to be thinking about using MarkLogic and NoSQL technologies for the right reasons. And as I started with, as a data architect on the first project that brought in MarkLogic, other teams came to me and were hearing that I was working with this technology, and they wanted to also to use MarkLogic just right away, and without even thinking too much more about it. And I was a little concerned that it was just kind of based on the shiny new toy, right? So I went to my old group, Enterprise Architecture and Innovation, and said, I think maybe what I'm seeing, not only from these other teams, but also within this, this project, is that maybe we need to look at things a little differently, perhaps, in terms of maybe some patterns, some application development patterns, how we're architecting the architecture of the solution, given that we're not using relational, we're using NoSQL, we're using MarkLogic. So with that, I got back in touch with my group. We formed a small working group comprised of enterprise architecture and database engineering, and a couple of other solution architects. And we came up with some data platform criteria to make it a little bit more than the shiny new toy, right? Across these platforms of MarkLogic, Relational, and Hadoop. And we selected these criteria, and this is by no means magic. It is just a set of criteria as we sat around thinking about what were some of the things that distinguish one platform from another, or just to start the discussion, really. And so it wasn't just about the shiny new toy anymore. But so if you look at data format and schema variability, we positioned these platforms kind of relative to one another. And we said, of course, data format, if you have one, not dealing with a lot of different formats, and you have a stable data schema, relational is a good fit. And that's a kind of a spectrum there, is showing those lines going across these. Whereas MarkLogic and Hadoop are much more geared for unstructured data, high schema variability. So when you have a lot of different schemas to accommodate. And the next two, advanced search or semantics and graph data, those are some criteria that, of course, that is where MarkLogic would excel. Those are some key features that would differentiate your use case in what platform to use. Hadoop might be somewhat in the middle depending on your implementation and products that you've used, whereas relational, those features simply aren't really available. The last two criteria, skill set availability and infrastructure availability, these really speak to where Northern Trust is on our technology adoption lifecycle curve. We're still early in our journey with MarkLogic. Relational, for us, I'm sure many of you, it's a mature platform. You've got a lot of skills set, well developed for decades in the field, right? Same thing with infrastructure. For us, we have started out using MarkLogic on physical hardware. So whereas with Relational, we have virtual environments, so it's much more, shorter lead time, basically. And whereas with MarkLogic, if you're provisioning a new environment on hardware, that takes longer lead time. We wanted teams to be thinking about these things. So yes, there's a lot of benefits to going to MarkLogic for some of these reasons of data, variability and a variety of formats and advanced search and semantics. But you also have to think about that skill set that you need to take into consideration. You need to learn the new technology. Think about the the environment provisioning too. So like I said before, the first project that brought in MarkLogic was called the Transaction Hub. So I'll just give you a little bit of overview of what that was about. And actually, we brought in MarkLogic before the data platform criteria was established. It was the follow-on projects after that that really kind of caused some need for that. So to give you an overview of that, the Transaction Hub, the goal of it is to build a transaction processing engine and a scalable, rapid delivery architecture, microservices architecture, and create an operational data store for the transactions. And to leverage what we call the ISO 20022 standard. It's a financial services industry standard for trade. One of the areas is trade processing. And the requirements of this were to capture trade messages in a variety of formats, okay? Validate the trade message is accurate and complete, enrich the trade with additional reference data, and then transform that trade message to downstream systems. So really, we have a lot of those things we talked about. And again, this was before that framework was created, but it really did fit well. And that's one of the reasons why it was the first one out of the gate, really, to bring in MarkLogic. Now, another requirement that they had was to be ACID compliant, which is to ensure the transaction integrity and consistency, completeness. And that was a very important thing because, with NoSQL, yes, a lot of NoSQL databases you could bring in, and accommodate the, variability of the schemas, the data formats, and so forth. But the ACID compliance was a very important feature that MarkLogic offered, which is very important. And certainly, we wouldn't have been able to do this as easily with Relational because that has always been a challenge of all those schemas, the various schemas of the different trades, the, the variability of the data types. So it was a good fit. Okay, now I know this is a busy chart, but it just goes to say, kind of illustrate that exactly what happened. Transaction Hub was first, right at the top there. And following on quickly after that were many other use cases, really, really good. And what we found is that they were reflecting these criteria that we talked about before, the data platform criteria. And you'll see that in there's common themes across these business challenges, like the data format, schema variability, the need to search, and so on. And when we talked to these various teams in preparing for this presentation about revisiting, why did you go with MarkLogic? We know we talked about some of these data platform criteria, but what were the features that you were really seeking that addressed those problems? And it was search, ACID compliance, flexible structures was a very common one, as you can see, streamlining ETL, so getting that data in quickly, modeling it later kind of thing, querying the metadata. These are some unique things, and storing JSON and XML. So I'll talk about a few of these. And certainly by no means is this a complete list of all the features of MarkLogic, we know that. But this is just kind of how we're first stepping into it, and these are some of the things that it really addressed that really weren't easily, I think, possible with Relational, so that's what made a difference. So again, I'll skip a few of these. The wealth management goals-powered solutions, one that Puneet will cover, application platform. We're looking to develop some common services across our application platform, one around event logging, so application events. Client account valuations, Puneet will also talk about. And I'll talk about data warehouse modernization because of my background. I really can relate to this. I'm not on this particular team right now, but I can really relate to how this MarkLogic can serve a fit here because of the, again, getting data in quickly. Because I know from working on data warehouse projects before, I would be the data modeler. I would be the person trying to synthesize all these different sources into one model, and then only to find out that something was missing or it wasn't quite right, and having to rework that model. So the data warehouse team at Northern Trust is looking to have faster time to market to ingest data sources more rapidly. And it's certainly always dealing with different schemas from different systems, data formats, and so they're looking to leverage that capability as well. And the other one I'll talk about, Puneet will go over data governance. And the POC, we're starting with the master data management team. Also, similar to the data warehouse, they need to ingest new data sources rapidly too, because they need to, the consumers of master data are always looking for, well, you don't have this source, what about that source? So they are very, pressured to get data in and make it available quickly. So time to market is key. And also, the master data management team currently logs the requests that come into them from their subscribing applications for master data. They log those requests as XML in a relational database. They also log events. We talked about events earlier. This is events of their MDM ecosystem processing, that they are storing all these XML event logs in a relational database. And it gets large very quickly, very large, and they have to purge it. And they have to purge it sooner than they would like. They would like to be able to better search on it as well. In fact, I think we're missing a circle here, actually, is about search, because eventually they'll get to search. But right now, they just want a better way to store those XML logs. So that's one of the things they're going to be looking at. And again, this is just POC. So a lot of potential there. So now comes the mind shift. And across these various use cases, this is exactly, I began to see like, wow, as people are starting to get into this, it's a matter of that going from the relational mindset to NoSQL. As soon as you take off those constraints of relational, now you're in NoSQL land. Okay, so what does that really mean? How do I interact as an application architect or as a data architect? How do I do my job? How do I architect this solution? So let's remember, MarkLogic is a database with built-in Google-like search, built-in triple store, built-in app server with ACID transactions. Now, that doesn't sound like relational to me. So I started to see things from a different point of view, really. I mean, my background is in data architecture, but one of the things I think is a mind shift, and I don't even have it up here, but I'll just speak to it. In going from data architecture as a data modeler, I would be off in my world doing data modeling, and I would give that schema, that database design to the application developers, and they would go do their thing. I really didn't know what they did, but they would come back eventually and tell me, oh, you got to, where was it, ETL developer, or Java developer, or .NET developer, tell me what was wrong with my model, and I'd fix it. Maybe I'd question it a little bit. But I tell you that now, we're not doing that data modeling, right, up front. So what I'm finding is that the worlds are coming together. So we have me, the data modeler, coming to the middle, Java developers also coming to the middle as they're starting to work with the documents, essentially, and that's the data. So the first thing is, how do we connect to the database? We're not connecting via ODBC or JDBC. We're connecting via REST API. And we have to think about making one call for the transaction on that REST API call to the database and not going back and forth, back and forth. So that's one lesson learned, one mind shift. Another one is the Java abstraction layer. Again, this was a whole new world to me. I was like, what? And I'm finding out that what they were doing all that time when they were working with relational databases is they were doing a lot of this in the Java layer. And now you can start to push those database operations to the database, whereas you might have done that previously in the Java layer. And in a related way, too, you think about that object relational mapping. That's something that was a paradigm where I used to hear them talk about these things, them, right? And now I realize that that's something that was necessary to deal with the complexities of that relational normalized model that I would have developed. And they were having to bring all that into an object model and do that mapping between Java and relational. That's no longer necessary. You can leverage the document model and just model the elements, the data elements that you need. So that's another mind shift that you're really not aware until you start to really get into this. So that's one of the things I wanted to mention. So with that, I'll turn it over back to Puneet, who will talk about that mind shift as it continued on with some of the other use cases.
Thanks, Maureen. It's a little bit about my role with Northern Trust. I started, like I said, about 2 years ago. And at that time, they were still evaluating MarkLogic, whether they want to use MarkLogic for TradeHub or not. Really, that's the state they were at. So I spent a lot of time at that time on educating and explaining what MarkLogic really is. Fast forward 6 months, they were in production. They were in production with the first use case. And as a result, you saw the list of the projects that spawned off. So everyone wanted to come aboard and want to see what exactly MarkLogic is, if they can utilize MarkLogic for their project or not. So my role in Northern a little bit shifted. I wanted to make sure that MarkLogic is utilized for the right reason. It's always not the shiny new toy syndrome that Maureen was talking about. We want to make sure that you guys are successful with your implementation too. So as a result, there were a lot of projects spawned up, and some of them are already in production. I'm not going to be talking about all of them, but just wanted to cover what was the reason those projects picked MarkLogic. The first one, the wealth management goals powered solution. It's around managing complex challenges on managing customer goals. So Northern Trust has a lot of customers, and they excel in providing customized service to their customers. As a customer to Northern Trust, my goals could be that don't invest more than $1 million in the month of December in Saudi Arabia. Just imagine if you want to express this goal in relational model. You would have to use hundreds of tables. You would have to create complex relationship. Northern already realized that we were not going to be able to do that. Let's express that as the way it's supposed to, as the way it's supposed to be, like documents. So they were already in the journey of storing that data in document format. And what they were looking for is a database that can store documents natively. And that's where MarkLogic came in. They also wanted to version those documents. Every time my goal changes, not only I want to store the previous version, I wanted to be able to go back and justify, why did you invest $1 million in Saudi Arabia? Because you asked me 3 months ago. You have the record for that. And so again, searchability, reporting, versioning, all of the requirements they had. And MarkLogic can handle that. Other projects, they are in their different level of maturity. Some are in production already, some are being developed. But on the base, the reason really there was the need to store unstructured data, semi-structured data, and being able to search on it. And not only do batch analytics, but be able to do real-time reporting on top. So they're feeding a customer-facing application directly from these applications as a result. I also wanted to share some of the experiences from these teams. The reason these projects went to production very quickly, and the reason they excel is also the skill set availability, another reason that comes with it. But they also utilize some of the tools really. During their project. One of the tools they worked on is Slush Data Explorer. What that really is really a UI on top of a MarkLogic database. If you already have MarkLogic running in your infrastructure, or you have database that already has data, then install this app right away. This app lets you explore the data and visualize it and analyze it as soon as the data gets into MarkLogic. Northern used this tool extensively, not the developers, not just the developers, but the data testers too. They can actually go into this app and look at a certain data set, filter on it, and do a search, and figure out what different attributes data set have. Northern also started giving this application to business. Right? When the data is loaded, business can actually go in and start utilizing it to come up with new requirements, things they were not even thinking about. All this is possible because MarkLogic, as Maureen said, has a search engine built in. right? We didn't have to do any configuration. All we had to do was install that app, set up some facets that you see on the left, and the search was available. Next lesson learned or feedback that we received from other team is make MarkLogic available to all your developers as freely as possible. What Northern did was MarkLogic is installed on developers' laptop, so they are free to play around with it, and also available in Docker, so they are free to break it and bring it back again whenever they need to. This helped decrease that learning curve a lot, right? If you are allowed to break it, then you can learn it faster, like the toy that you would play around with. Last thing is you can end up spending a lot of time in processes like automation, releases, and data delivery. One thing you can do is you can use MarkLogic plugin for Gradle, which is called ML-Gradle, and you can automate those. Right? You can streamline your releases from development to UAT environment, from UAT to production environment. Any release of configuration or code can be streamlined using ML-Gradle. We are working with the DBA team in Northern Trust to implement that process as well. Once this is streamlined, it's going to speed up the production and the release cycle even further. Next thing I want to talk about is the need for data governance. David Gobert talked about why do you want to govern your data, why do you want to manage lineage and provenance in your data. But to Northern, this was already in place. Northern is already cataloging all the information, all the assets that are available in the system. It's not just about the compliance and regulatory reason. It speeds up the production and it speeds up the adoption cycle too. If you know where your assets are, you can get to it faster. Data quality is another important factor. If I want to release this data to my customer, is it really to be ready to be released or not? Does it have a PII that needs to be redacted? Or lineage and provenance, that's another thing. The final data I'm releasing to my customer, are they even ready to see it? What was the original data look like when I got it from my third-party vendor? What was the process that changed it? All this information, Northern was already doing it, but they were doing it with the relational database. They already have an infrastructure in place that can track relational databases very well for all these three pillars of data governance. So requirement really was to do the same thing for MarkLogic, and we are working very closely with Northern Trust on that. And as a result, we have two goals, two projects in actually mind. One is in short term, and one is a little bit of longer term. In short term, we don't want to do any disruption. We want Northern to use the tools they have in place, and they can look at MarkLogic as another data source. Like I said, their tools are equipped to work with relational databases right now. So what we are doing is we are just exposing the critical data elements as a relational view to those data sources. So those tools can continue to look at MarkLogic as just like any other database, any other relational database. But as a result, what's happening is every new project that's spawned up, every project needs to identify those CDEs, critical data elements in their project. That's a process as a Northern we implemented, which means if my data has some PII, I need to be able to identify it. I need to follow to the standard that data governance team is setting for me, but only for the fields that they are asking for now, the CDEs. In long term, we have data governance team working with our product management team in MarkLogic. We want to reduce the effort that project team has to do manually right now. Eventually, it might be a REST endpoint that does profiling of the data, and you can generate a report from the data set, and those tools can directly call those REST APIs. So we are working towards more seamless integration, and that's in the plan. All right, so now we are at the part of the presentation where we will talk about the 10 key takeaways. So the way we got that is, we didn't really come up with this. Maureen and really didn't actually sit down and actually started writing these. We interviewed a lot of project teams for it. All the projects you saw listed there are more than that. We interviewed a lot of our project leads for that. We also talked to database engineering team, and we decided that these are the 10 key takeaways we can actually share with others too. Again, they are not in any relevancy order. We're going to do countdown 10 to 1, but they are really in the order that we saw that would be fit for Northern. All right, so the first one, if you are starting with MarkLogic, you have two choices of writing your server-side code, which is Xcode versus JavaScript. If you are new to both, you don't really care. But I've been with MarkLogic for a while, so for me, it's like picking up your favorite child. But it is a real question. It is a real question in front of developers who are trying to utilize MarkLogic to its full potential. What worked well for Northern is use the talent that you have in place. If you are a Java developer, then you're most likely to pick JavaScript very quickly. If you are new to both, then question really depends on best practices that industry has set up, really. We know that JSON and JavaScript are really close to each other. You can find a lot of examples of manipulating JSON using JavaScript. If you have a lot of XML data in your organization, then you can start learning Xquery, because Xquery is a wonderful XML query language. If you have a mixed structure, you have JSON, XML, RDF, all the data mixed together, really pick the one that you're more comfortable in. On the language side, potential side, there is really not any difference. You can do pretty much everything from both languages. So our lesson learned from that was start with what you are most comfortable with, and you have less of a learning curve. Moving on. So this is more for the DBAs, and this is sort of a standard we had to come up with while working in Northern. Show me a quick show of hand. How many DBAs are in the group here? I see like 3 or 4, but that's fine. I'll talk to them. But that's really the question. Shared clusters versus dedicated cluster was a question that DBA had to answer whenever a new project was coming on. What they had to do was, do you really want a separate cluster? Do you want high availability? Or do you want to just go in a shared cluster that we have set up, and you want to share resources with other projects that are out there? The standard we came up with is it really depends on your SLA. Maureen talked about the TradeHub project that has a very strict SLA. A transaction comes in, that needs to settle in a certain time. If it doesn't get settled, then you are in a lot of trouble. You can't afford to lose any resources there. For those kind of resources, you can go with the dedicated cluster. If you're just starting with MarkLogic, you can, if you're experimenting, if it's just a POC, or if it is your first project and you don't know how much data you're going to have, how much of user traffic you're going to have, it's okay to start in a shared cluster. It's less of an overhead for your DBA folks and less of an overhead for you guys too, since you don't have to manage an entire environment. Start on the shared cluster. One catch there is that the shared cluster is shared resources. So it's always a chance that a project that you're running might eat up resources for other projects that are running at the same time. There are a few things on the MarkLogic cluster that are shared at the cluster level. So you can always run into those issues. So pros and cons of both approach. Maureen a little bit touched on it. Number 8 is putting data logic close to your database, and David Gorbett again talked about it this morning too. The curation layer that we talked about, where exactly we should write it. But Northern, we came up with a standard that if it is a data-centric operation, for example, if you are updating 10 billion documents by calculating one field and adding to the metadata, just use server-side code for that. No reason to bring all the data to your middle tier to do that operation. Do your data logic operation closer to database using the server-side programming language we were talking about, Xquery or JavaScript. This is more for the developer. If you are starting with MarkLogic, use the debugging tools, use the syntax highlighter. If you have an IDE of your choice, there are plugins available for MarkLogic. You can download that and start working with that. If you're using Eclipse, there's a plugin for MarkLogic you can start utilizing. IntelliJ has one plugin too for MarkLogic. You can start actually utilizing that too. So they use that a lot. And with that, I'll pass it on to Maureen.
Thank you, Puneet. So number 6 is think about your URI naming standards. URI is the Universal Resource Identifier, and it is the key to your documents. So of course it would be important, right? So think about it. And so you're kind of up to your own, devices to what kind of standards, but we have one standard that is developing at Northern Trust, and one team has put this forth. And so just an example, they don't have to do it this way, but just to get the point across that that's a URI, and we're putting out there that it's 4 parts. It consists of 4 parts separated by slash. The first part starts with a slash and is the prefix, we'll think of it that way. It's the domain or the project, in this case, EDW, Enterprise Data Warehouse. The document type is the next portion, and this is now perhaps within the EDW, the valuations domain. And within valuations, it's a cache position. So this is another way of kind of building that hierarchy, a framework of your document, thinking of it that way. The next part is to create a unique ID, and that is usually comprised of something in your document. So in this case, it is the action, the calculation is the phrase there, and then the account ID and the generation date, which makes it unique. And then finally, the last part, the 4th part, is the extension. So in this case, JSON, or it could be XML. So it's important to think about it. Give it some thought and start to think about some standards. Number 5, the Java Client API. We're a big Java shop, so that's one thing that's very relevant. And we are saying no to POJO, even though it is a good way to get started, as we have understood. It is not necessary, and what you will find is that with the POJO repository, some things can take place that you might think about differently later on. For example, the object names can become embedded in your document, which is not necessary and not needed. So again, it's one of those kind of trade-offs of, well, I could do it quickly this way, and you may have some artifacts to deal with, or I could just not do that and not have to worry about cleaning it up later. Same thing with the next one is that we'll create a default URI is generated, and which I was just talking about. It's a good idea to really explicitly think about your naming standards. So another thing that's not so good. Again, one of those like get up and running quick and dirty versus maybe just don't use it and just do it the right way right off the bat so you don't have to clean up, right? The next one is number 4, store data as is. We've heard about this quite a bit. I can't stress this enough because here we have an example I'll show you where we have wrapped a nice XML in quotes. So this isn't really storing it as is. This is storing it in quotes, which is like kind of putting a wrapper around it. Now you can't, it doesn't index automatically and nicely on ingest. So if you have XML, just store it as XML. Don't wrap it in quotes. And perhaps this is simply another holdover from our relational days. And this is maybe the way that it was stored in relational. But you have to start getting out of that relational box. Number 3, as long as we're talking about XML, if you're using that, you have an XSD, why don't you leverage them? Because you can store those XSDs as schemas in MarkLogic. Here's an example. And this way, you would be able to validate your XML document as it comes in, storing it natively. And you can validate it automatically in the database, leverage the database. Don't do all that validation unnecessarily in the Java layer. Number 2, the envelope pattern. We've talked about, and you've heard a lot about the document envelope pattern, right? Here is just illustration to show the benefits that you can store your data as is. We just talked about in that content source section. You can also wrap it around with the canonical or enterprise data model, the common names that everyone uses to call things. And then you can have a metadata section. And these can be whatever makes sense for your organization. And here's an example, just an example of how Northern is using one of the projects to do that. So again, the content section at the bottom, the metadata section at the top, and they're using it to store the lineage, really, the lineage metadata around when it was ingested, the module version, the document version, and so on. So leverage the document model, or the envelope pattern. Number 1, that learn continuously, it's free. MarkLogic University offers several tracks, administrator track, business user track, data architect, and developer. So, and also MarkLogic World too, right? So leverage that free training and learn the innovative technologies. With that, I'll just move on to what's next for Northern Trust in our journey. Well, we're looking to potentially establish a center of excellence for MarkLogic. We're currently just formed a community of practice, kind of another word for the idea of getting people together around a common knowledge set. And we are starting to build a repository for documentation and knowledge share, best practices, that sort of thing. and to leverage our ISO standards, quite honestly, in the financial services industry better. We have some XMLs, we have XSDs, we have the standard, maybe even with potentially the semantics and with FIBO, the ontologies there too. Integrate ML-Gradle into our CI/CD processes, and potentially explore the Data Hub framework as it matures also. Just a little information from our legal department. Thank you very much. And last is our summary of our 10 key takeaways. And like Puneet said, none are really more important than the others. And it really is a culmination of a lot of talking with the teams. And what they found are some important lessons learned as we've just kind of taken this little benchmark of our journey. But I would be remiss if I didn't say ours go to 11, really, right? Because if you need that extra push over not the cliff, the chasm, to shift your mind, you really need to think about getting out of that relational box, thinking about architecting your applications with a different mindset, with shifting your mind. So some of the things we've learned, and keeping an open mind to develop your applications and architect them, to leverage the innovation that the reason why you're going to enable those new capabilities so you can deliver things faster, better, cheaper. Thank you. Well, at this point in time, I think we can take some questions if we have some time.
Yeah, I think we have some time for questions, right? Okay. So my takeaway was to make it easy for developers, we basically have to give them the tools so they can break that shiny new toy. That's great. And not to pick our favorite kid. Okay, good. That was actually really helpful. Right. So with that, let's open it up to questions here. Yes.
Hi. In data warehouse modernization and batch analytics, where do you see MarkLogic fit into those two areas, data warehouse modernization and batch analytics? Okay,
if I understood correctly, data warehouse modernization, yes, and the batch analytics.
Correct.
We have not explored the batch analytics in Northern Trust, but the data warehouse modernization certainly we're looking at the just being able to not have to do that data modeling up front, as I mentioned earlier, and to being able to develop the model more iteratively. And that's, I think, that is different. Having come from years of experience with data warehousing, that is a real shift, right? We didn't do that before. And so I think as you saw in the example of that envelope pattern, that was actually from our enterprise data warehouse project, where they're using that to store the lineage within there. And do you have anything to add since you've been working with me?
I can elaborate to that. So the stage that data hub modernization project is at, Northern Trust is still at the consuming state. They want to consume data sources faster than they were doing it before. And they want to bring all the data sources at one place first. Now, the idea is that you can deliver to whatever use case you want to deliver to, whether it's a batch analytics or is a real-time consumption, using the data services that this group is building to. Right? So this is the direction this is going at. Might be use cases later on in future that MarkLogic can be utilized as a batch analytics tool too. We haven't explored that yet in Northern. Right? Goal is to focus on the current goals really, to bring data into one place first.
Hi. So the use cases which you presented, some of the projects, right? Are these for the greenfield projects, or you also tried something for legacy?
That's a good question. Let me think back. A lot of it, I think, is really more of legacy, kind of not greenfield, because we are doing a modernization of existing platforms. Mm-hmm. And Transaction Hub is that, or we're adding on capabilities like with goals-powered solutions. We are, again, it's modernizing the application platform. I can't think of anything else. MDM also, the master data management, that POC is building on to that ecosystem, but modernizing it, right? Leveraging the capabilities. So I don't know if do you know if there's any others that at Northern which are greenfield?
So most of the projects that were spawned, they were out of a necessity, mm-hmm. really. Trade Hub, we really wanted to make a centralized place where all the trades can go in. MDM, there was a critical production issue that were happening. That's why they were trying MarkLogic to actually solve that. But I would say it's a mix in Northern. You have greenfield as well as existing modernization effort that's in progress.
That's right. Certainly there is potential, I think, for greenfield, especially around the analytics area. Yeah, definitely could do more.
Yep.
A question for Puneet. From the number one about free training.
Yes.
Can you talk about the business track training, what that involves?
Yeah, I'm not the educated one. We have Greg Niss in the back. He can probably answer that question better.
It's handy.
Get you the expert.
Yep.
Perfect.
Thanks. Yeah, so the business track, it's something new that we launched, and it's really meant to train the non-technical user on what are good use cases for MarkLogic technology, and really how those can be used to deliver value, what differentiates the technology and how that lets you do things at lower cost faster. And so again, non-technical, it's a short investment of time. You can take it online with an instructor, and very shortly we're actually going to be launching the self-paced version of that track as well.
Thanks, Greg.
I think we have time for one more question. Guess we'll take that time back.
I wish I had a good question for you, because for the last 2 years, Maureen, you've been asking me questions. So this could have been payback.
Oh, you were just waiting for it,
But
right?
no, thank you
Yeah.
guch. Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.